All right. So again, welcome to everyone for our program today. I'm excited for this topic because as many of you have probably experienced, we've got customers that come to us with ideas, and sometimes those ideas aren't well vetted out, and sometimes we're part of that process, sometimes we're not. But design for manufacturing is a key area to make sure a project's successful. And if it's not done as a collaborative effort and done in a well thought out process, it can make a mess for years to come, as many of you probably know. So I've known Tom KraMer, the president and CEO of Kablooe Design, for many years now. Tom is a great innovator. He's always been a person that comes up with great ideas and knows how to collaborate with people. He's done a great job running Kablooe, and you've probably seen him speak at some events, med device shows, things like that a lot of people seek out Tom to kind of share his insights on things. And you may already know, but Tom actually has a book that's out right now. It is called, I don't want to make sure I don't goof it up here, but Innovate the Way You Were Designed to. It's a pretty cool concept because it's not just about designing things. It's about using the way you're wired and the way the talents that you have, and being able to take that creativity and apply it to real world applications. So it's not just about designing things, but it's about kind of how we operate and how our brains work. So it's pretty cool concept. So I'm sure Tom will touch on that a bit today. But otherwise, Tom's got over 31 years of experience in R&D and design and development, a lot in med devices. And again, Kablooe Design is a great partner in the industry for a lot of our companies that are trying to come up with new ideas and designs. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom and give our presentation for the day. And Tom, again, is a very interactive person, very collaborative. So along the way, guys, feel free to put questions in the chat function, and we'll either ask them for you or call on you if you want to speak for yourself. And then otherwise, we'll save some time for Q&A at the end as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Tom.
Sounds good. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Yeah, super happy to be here chatting with you guys. And I want to thank you, Steve, for the opportunity to come and talk with the group. If you can enable my screen sharing, I'll go to the presentation when you get that. But like Steve said, I've been around the industry for 31 years, founder of Kablooe Design, and have done a lot of medical device, but a lot of other types of devices too over the years, in terms of design and development and innovation. And when you're around for 31 years, it kind of makes you feel old. But then you also realize that you've seen some things, you've learned some things, you've actually become maybe an expert in some things, not by training or academic, but just by experience in the School of Hard Knocks. And at some point, you think about, gosh, I could write this stuff down. And henceforth comes a book. And that's why, that's why I ended up writing this book. And like Steve said, it kind of caught Steve's attention, and that's how we linked up for today's event. So there's a QR code there on the screen. If you're interested in it, click on that. It'll take you to the website. I think Brenda put it up there too. But the neat thing about it is in the beginning, it talks about how we tick. How do we tick as humans? And how do we tap into that when it comes to creative design and development and innovation? And then second half of the book really gets into some nuts and bolts about development and manufacturing, and how you do some of these things. And manufacturing is a big part of it. So I was pretty excited when Steve gave me the opportunity to talk to a group like yours, because manufacturing is a huge part of what we have to think about as creative, innovative thinkers. And if we don't, things go awry really fast. So my talk for today, I just wanted to share a little bit about Kablooe. Like I said, we've been around for a lot of years. These are the kind of things we do. We're doing research, we're inventing things, we're coming up with ideas, we're designing them, prototyping them, engineering them, and then trying to get them off to contract manufacturers or other types of manufacturers who can make these things become a reality. So that's where we spend our time. And I thought it would be really good for today's presentation to share with you a little bit about how do some of your customers think. So our agenda for today is we're kind of focusing on these sort of design focused customers, customers who have sort of this design aptitude to their products and their way of doing things. And I thought there'd be three important things to look at. I thought first, let's talk about how they think and what they're thinking when they approach development. I think it really helps to get inside somebody's head. And if you can understand what they're thinking and why they're thinking that way. Then I thought we'd talk a little bit about their needs. Like, what do they need as they're a company that's developed some device that they are they're really gung-ho about the design of it. And they want to bring it into the manufacturing world. What are their needs? Because if you understand what their needs are, you can really help pull them into the manufacturing world efficiently and in a way that doesn't cause problems. And then lastly, I wanted to focus on some actions, like what can you as a manufacturer do? What kind of actions can you take to sort of help all of this come into place? So as most of my talks, there are a lot of theory and philosophy in the beginning. And then at the end, there's some things you might want to take notes on. So enjoy the beginning, listen, think, maybe take some notes in the end, but for sure ask questions either through the chat or just as we're going. So let's talk about thinking first. So sometimes customer will bring you a device, a design, and say, I want this manufactured. And this might be running through your mind. It's like, what in the world were they thinking when they thought they were going to manufacture this thing? Well, it does help to get inside their head and try to understand what were they thinking. And there's a lot of things that go on. So they have a design team. They probably have an engineering team, a design team, and there's a lot of things going on in their heads. But one of the biggest things they're thinking about is the potential. And that's the potential for their product, their device, to actually not just function, to actually fulfill some sort of need that a user is going to have. That's what it all backs up to for them in their mind. And there's this potential that they can meet this need. So constantly they're thinking about the potential of their device meeting some sort of person's need. Obviously, a device doesn't exist unless it's there to perform a job. And that job is there because the user needs that job performed. So it's this kind of thinking that is at the bedrock of their innovation. But if they've got a design team, they're a design-oriented company, there's a lot of this right brain thinking going on. And we all have a left and a right side to our brains. And this picture sort of represents what's going on the left side and what's going on the right side. And we may think about these design-oriented people and companies and designers, and we might think that, everything's happening on the right side. And to a degree, that's true. There's a lot of this right-sided stuff going on in their brain, but they're also trained to be balanced to a degree. So they're trying to grab this left brain activity, and they're trying to grab this right brain activity in their heads, and they're trying to bring it together to create that potential to solve that problem for that user. So that's kind of how they're trained to approach these kinds of problems, if they've been trained, I guess you would say, correctly. But there's been some studies on the brain that I think really shed some light on this, and they're very interesting. So they do these studies, where they put electrodes on people's heads, and then they have them, go into certain activities, do certain things, and they watch to see which part of the brain lights up, because you've got lobes all over your brain, and they all have different functions, so they're all lighting up for different things. And that's really interesting when you start thinking about left brain people, because we kind of think of mathematicians, manufacturing people, and technical people. We think of them as left brain, and artists and designers we think of as right brain. So through some of these studies, they found some interesting things. And one of them was this, that they found people don't tend to have a stronger left side of their brain or right side of their brain. And that might have been something we were thinking. It's like, oh, that guy's very creative. She's an artist. She's got a stronger right side to her brain. Absolutely not true that side of her brain is stronger. And they even went further to discover that personality types don't have anything to do with one side of your brain being more active or stronger. And we used to think that, like, oh, this person's a nerd, they're a geek, they're very math oriented, so they're maybe a left brainer, or this person's really weird. Personality doesn't have anything to do with it. What they discovered was it's more about connection by connection. So the connections they're talking about are those synapses that happen in your brain when your brain is thinking and making a decision and a thought, they see your hemispheres being utilized more or less. Doesn't mean they're stronger or weaker. They're being utilized more or less based on the challenges you're putting in front of it. So that can really make us think it's like working out. If you put a lot of activities in front of the right side of your brain, you're going to work out the right side of your brain. Same with the left. What do we do when we go to school? Go to school for math. We just work out the left side of our brain, and it becomes, and our brains, all the decisions that we make and the things we do, 95% of it is memory and repetition. So whatever you work out in your brain, that's going to be what you naturally tend to drift to when it comes to decision making. That's why it appears that someone might have a stronger right hemisphere. It's just because they've exercised that. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have the ability to do the things that a right brain has to do. So you think about...
Tom, I got a quick question on that. So do you think it's more nature or nurture as far as, when you say they tend to, work out one side or the other more? Is it because they've been exposed to certain things? I mean, if they've been exposed to more of an academia household versus somebody who's maybe exposed to more of an artistic or something, or is it
totally nurture? Yeah, totally nurture. Nature, we all get an even deck. We all get a right side that works 100% perfectly and a left side that works 100% perfectly when we're born. And then it's all nurture from there. So we can work one side out and make it so familiar to us that all of our thinking and our decisions come from memory, and we're just constantly using that side because it comes comfortable. But we're doing it at the expense of a perfectly good other side that we've just neglected. That's still there. It didn't die. It didn't become weak. It's still there, ready to be used. So I like to say that anybody can be a creative thinker and use the right side of their brain. And Steve, to your point, there was another study that was done that's really interesting, that it really addresses your question about nature and nurture. How do we nurture these things? Because we're all born with it. Well, this was a 21-year long study. It was one of the longest studies I've ever seen done. And they studied children, started at the age of 4, and they studied them until they were 25 years old. And they followed these kids into adulthood. And one of the things that they found was that these people, as they moved into adulthood, they lost their ability to think in nonlinear ways. They were calling it divergent thinking, which is nonlinear thinking. And they say that's a key component to creativity. So you think about creativity in the right side of your brain. And they're saying that nonlinear thinking, and linear thinking is very logical. It's math, this plus this plus this equals this. Nonlinear thinking is, gee, I'm looking at that horse and it's very pretty and it makes me feel something inside. And I think I'm going to go write a poem and draw a picture of it. That's nonlinear thinking. You can't put that out. So that nonlinear thinking, they were seeing that kids are losing this. So the nurturing of this is going away. And the interesting thing is they're born with it. So I want to show you one of the examples that they did in this study. They took kindergartners. They took 5-year-old kids. They took a bunch of them. And at the beginning of the week, while they were in school in kindergarten, they gave them a particular task. And this one task was just draw a bird. That's all they said, draw a bird. This example is a really good one. This little 5-year-old boy, this is what he did when he was told to draw a bird. So you can kind of see, you can tell from a 5-year-old that this physical 2D image came out of his hand, which came out of his head. And in his head, he had an image of what the essence of a bird was. And he tried to get that down. Well, throughout the course of that week, they taught other things like, math and spelling and all kinds of other things. And in their math classes, they were doing things like this. You probably remember from childhood. I've got, so many birds here. I draw a box around so many. If I took that box away, how many are left? And you're learning subtraction. So they're going through the course of their typical learning. At the end of the week, they gave the kids the same task. They said, draw a bird. That same little boy, this is what he drew at the end of that week. So you can see how his thinking was influenced so much by what he was learning and being taught and how he was being nurtured. He had the essence of a bird in his mind at one point, but now he started leaning on the other side of his brain, on that left side of his brain, because it was something he was shown that he knew, that he draw a conclusion from a linear thing. Doesn't mean we shouldn't learn subtraction. What it means was, this is what's happening to our brains after we're educated. but we're being educated in our society. We're being educated very linearly. It's a very linear thing. Designers' thinking isn't linear. It's not linear at all when you're trying to do divergent thinking and come up with solutions. I call it scattered chaos thinking. So when we're trying to find solutions to problems and come up with new ideas and be innovative, I call it scattered chaos, because to me, it's like this big swirling cloud of ideas and thoughts and feelings. And that cloud is swirling around in your head, and as things swirl by, you grab them and you kind of look at them and think, what about this? And you grab something else, what about that? It's not linear. And I think that's where a lot of the innovation happens, is in scattered chaos thinking. The problem is people are afraid of it. Kindergartners aren't afraid of it because they're thinking like that all the time. As we grow up, we get afraid of that kind of thinking because it seems risky. There's not answers. We want answers to questions. And so we drift away from that. And the interesting thing that they found out after that, when those kids started off and they were 4 years old at the age of 4, they would test them for divergent thinking. And again, that's a component of creativity. And 98% of them could demonstrate that, yes, they could do divergent nonlinear thinking in their heads. 98% of them at the age of 4. At the age of 9, only 32% of them could demonstrate that kind of thinking. At the age of 14, it was down to 10. And by the time they were grad students, at the age of 25, only 2% could demonstrate the ability to do divergent nonlinear thinking, which really spearheads creativity. So Steve, to your point, that's the nurture right there, being lost,
Can you give an example? I mean, I understand the general concept of what divergent thinking would be, but can you give a couple of examples? I mean, when you're talking about a 4-year-old with divergent thinking versus a 25-year-old, what are the 2%ers doing at age 25 that you would still call divergent thinking?
Yeah, well, let's use that bird example because that was very visual. When they tell a kid to draw a bird, he's really thinking like I described. In his mind, the right side of his brain and left side of his brain are working together to try to reveal to him what the essence of a bird is. So he's thinking of essence. He's thinking birds fly, they're in the sky, they have movement, I see they have wings, all of these things create an essence. So when he decides to capture that, it's an essence. Now, if it was linear thinking, like if you asked a 25-year-old to draw a bird, you would probably get something much more realistic because they might be leaving out the essence. They might be thinking the beak is pointy, a head is round, a wing is shaped like this, like a triangle, the feet are like this, and they would be very technical because it would be based on empirical experience and evidence. Where divergent thinking is based on feelings, emotions, thoughts, essences, and you're trying to grab those things and give them definition and voice. This is why poetry is such it's an art, poetry is in the arts, because you're trying to take these things inside of you called feelings, and you're trying to take them and represent them with words. It's really hard to do if you're just thinking on the left side of your brain. But if you were to let the right side of your brain go. Another one is brainstorming. This is a good example. In brainstorming, we get somebody who's thinking linearly, and we say, hey, we have a problem to solve here. I have a stick and I can write with it, but if I write something that I didn't want to write, I've got to remove it somehow. What do I do? And somebody who is thinking very linearly is, okay, this thing left a residue, that residue is down, now that residue has to be removed, and I need a material that can interact with that residue and remove it. So boom, 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 and they come up with the eraser. Somebody who's doing divergent thinking is thinking, you got an image down on paper you don't like. Well, what if the paper was just gone? I'm just going to make combustible paper. So if you breathe on it, it lights on fire, and boom, it's gone and it burns up. That's divergent thinking. It wasn't in a logical linear process from the things that were in front of you. It totally came from this scattered chaos thinking where they were thinking, I've seen things disappear before. How do they disappear? I was at a magician's show once and he made it blow up with fire and it disappeared. Why can't I just make the paper burn up? That was not linear at all. So those are coming from memories, they're coming from emotions, they're coming from feelings. So that's how they look different. And that's why brainstorming seems so crazy, people come up with the stupidest ideas, but then somewhere in that stupid idea, there's this little kernel of something that can become reality that no one would have ever thought of if they would have just been linear thinking. And that's why they say divergent thinking is a key component to creativity. You're not going to be very creative if you can't do divergent thinking and nonlinear thinking. If everything's just linear, kind of fights out creativity. We see this when we think about engineering and design. Engineering is figuring things out. How do we figure things out? But in our brains, if we were to look into our brains, we would see that there's a certain lobe that is responsible for figuring things out. I call it the figuring things out lobe. It's an actual lobe, and you can see here, it's on the right side of your brain. And it's actually the lobe that's responsible for creative problem solving. So again, if you think about being innovative and creative, if you're an engineer, you have to figure something out. What is figuring something out? That's solving a problem. If that means you're being tasked as an engineer, you're being tasked to be a creative problem solver. And that lobe for creative problem solving is on the right side of your brain. Incidentally, it's the same lobe that lights up when you're looking at art, when you're doing poetry, when you're thinking about music, when you're doing artistic things. It's the artistic lobe that lights up when you're doing creative problem solving. So we got to ask ourselves, what have we engineered out of our lives? What have we taken out of our lives? If we think about Socrates, so this is Socrates, you think about Socrates, he didn't teach people philosophy like when we go to college and if we take philosophy, we're learning philosophy. That's not what Socrates was teaching. He was teaching life. Socrates was teaching, this is how you are a productive member of society. It was life. Well, we say there's 4 branches to what philosophy teaches. There's metaphysics, which is the study of reality. There's epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. There's the axiology, which is the study of art and beauty. And there's logic, which is the study of reasoning. These are the 4 branches of philosophy. But when Socrates was teaching his students and saying, this is what you need to do to be a productive member in life, we have this thing called axiology in there, art, beauty. Now, when we go to college for engineering, we never get art and beauty in college. We don't. We've engineered it out of our training and out of our lives. And you saw the statistics as to how many 25-year-olds can even demonstrate the creative task of nonlinear thinking. It's almost non-existent. Well, this is why we've engineered it out of our lives. But it's important for us to have it there. And that's why Leonardo da Vinci is such a great example, because he was so much an artist and he was so much an engineer and technician at the same time. And what we really need is we need designers and engineers sort of working together as one, meaning the designers that work for your customers, they're tasked with being these divergent thinkers, but they're tasked with bringing that into the world of reality and making it work, because engineering is making things work. And I like to say, engineers solve a problem, designers figure out how to make it useful for humans. That's kind of the world we live in now. If you go to school to be a designer, you're being taught how to make things useful for humans. If you go to school as an engineer, you're being taught how to figure things out, how to solve a problem. If Leonardo da Vinci was standing here today, he'd be laughing at us, because he'd be saying, why would you ever separate those 2 things into 2 disciplines? Those things should be joined at the hip. So we've got designers who are demonstrating this kind of thinking, but they're tasked with bringing it into reality. And they don't always do that very good, because it's not the top focus for them. That potential to solve that user's problem, that's the top focus for them. They're constantly thinking of that at the top of their mind. We can see this if we think about a joke. And we can see that, remember I said that creative problem solving is what you're tasked to do as a designer or an engineer. And that creative problem solving lobe is on the right side of your brain. And that right side of your brain, that's where you do art. Well, think about a joke. So they've actually done studies with this. And if I had more time, I'd go deep into these studies because they're fascinating. But think of a joke. Somebody, a guy walks into a bar, he talks to the priest, talks to a doctor, says this and this. Very linear, right? You're setting it up. It's a stair step, linear, 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 linear set of events. And then you deliver a punchline. So they put the electrodes on people's heads and they told them jokes, and they were watching what was lighting up. The buildup of the joke left side, left side, left side of the brain, lighting up, lighting up, lighting up, lighting up. Punchline, pause, brief pause, nothing lights up. And then after a brief millisecond pause, that lobe on the right side of the brain that's responsible for creative problem solving lights up, and the person laughs. So why is that? Linear things that all made sense, linear thinking. All of a sudden, they're delivered a non sequitur, the punchline, non-sequential, doesn't fit into this linear thing that they just learned. And so their brain has to make it fit. So they pause for a second while the right side and the left side of the brain work together, and somehow they find a humorous way to make it fit. And they put it over here and they make it fit. And then they laugh. What did they do? They solved a problem creatively. So they became a creative problem solver and said, this doesn't fit. I've got to figure out a creative way to make this fit. The only way to make it fit is in this funny way. It's something that wouldn't normally happen, something that doesn't follow, and it becomes funny. That's what humor is. Creative problem solving, moving from the left side of your brain to the right side of your brain, making that leap. That's what a joke is. So that shows us how we're creative problem solvers, and that applies to everything in life. That applies to our manufacturing issues. It applies to our product design and development issues. It applies to your relationships and everything in life. I love what Picasso said about how our brains tick. Every child's an artist. We saw that in those statistics. Every child was an artist at the age of 4. Problem is how to remain an artist once you grow up. Picasso saw this, and this was way before that study. He saw this as evident in people's brains and lives, and it's very true. So that's kind of what's going on inside a designer's brain. I wanted to share that with you. It's all in the book, but it helps you understand how designers think and where they're coming from. Steve, I didn't get a chance to look at the chat. Are there any questions in there that we need to address right now about that?
I don't think we've got any new ones. I'll keep asking my my left brain questions that I come up with.
Yeah, fire away whenever you have. So the next section I wanted to share with, well, what are some of these needs that these customers have? If they're really design oriented and design focused, what are some of their needs? And I think this is important to understand their needs, because we can understand how to meet their needs if we know what they are. Well, the first one is that they have gone through a process. So to get where they are, if they're trained properly, they actually have gone through a process to get where they are. It wasn't willy-nilly. Even though I explained it like scattered chaos thinking, that activity where you employ scattered chaos thinking and you glean information from it, that activity happens within a process that's structured and makes sense. And you need to understand that they've done this and they've gone through this process. Oftentimes people don't realize that. And I love what Peter Erickson said. He used to be Senior Vice President of Innovation at General Mills. And he said, as soon as you put structure and process into place, you don't have creativity. The innovation process and invention process, that's just inherently a creative process. You can't plan for it. It's serendipitous. Great ideas, they just happen, and it's inefficient. And then he says, I contend that this is not the case, that these things happen as a result of structuring these things properly. So most designers have been trained to go through a process and to harness this creative right brain thinking. So we have a process at Kablooe, but suffice it to say, I simplified it way down because you could teach for a semester on development process. So I simplified it into these 4 steps. This is what most design-oriented customers of yours who have designers on their team, this is what these designers most of them have gone through if they've done this correctly. So they did some research, and that sets the stage for them to succeed with that potential. Remember that potential to solve that need. It's the back of their mind. So this sets the stage for them to succeed. Then they go through this ideation process where they're doing the scattered chaos cloud and they're coming up with ideas, but then they start trying to make those ideas a little bit more real. And in that stage, they're filling the stage with possibilities. So you got to understand that they've gone through this time period where they've filled the stage with all kinds of possibilities. Then they get to more of a design-focused stage, this 3rd stage, where they believe they have a solution and they want to start playing with that solution. How do we change it? How do we make it? How do we design it? How do we shape it? How does it function? They start narrowing in on some details. And in that last engineering phase, which is the biggest of the 4. That engineering phase alone is just as big, if not bigger than the other first 3 combined. That's where they make it real. And so that's where all the details, your tolerances and your draft angles and your friction and your design for, everything, that's where all that happens. So they've usually gone through a process like this before they come to you. And if they haven't, you can probably sniff it out pretty easily because you're seeing things that are missing a lot of what they need. And so the important need that they have here is they need you to understand that they went through a detailed process to get where they are. So certain features can't be compromised. Like they've come to the conclusion that they need certain features in their product. And it's really important for you to understand what those are so you're not making suggestions that violate those features that just can't be compromised, or they won't reach the potential that they want to reach for meeting their product users' needs. So that's important to understand too. This is what they go through. It's very different than the manufacturing process that most of you go through. One of the most important parts of this is the research phase. So that first part, because research work actually leads to creativity. A lot of people think the opposite. They think, oh, I can be creative if nobody tells me what to do. I can just make whatever I want, and that's creative. That's not really creative. Real creativity is when you do a lot of research and you understand what all of the constraints are. You understand what you have to do to meet that potential for that user, and you understand what that means in terms of the form of the product. And then you can be creative, finding out ways to make that work. So research leads to creativity. Creativity fuels innovation, and you need that divergent thinking to do it. And that's why they've developed a unique design for their product in the first place, is they want to innovate. So that research is really important. And when I talk about that research, I'm not necessarily talking about test tubes and Bunsen burners and things like that. I'm just talking about whatever activities they got to go through as a development team to make good decisions about what they're going to design. So that means research about who their users are, what their users' needs are, how their product has to perform in order to meet those users' needs. They go through a lot of that kind of research. And it's important because that research leads to knowledge. And Einstein really believed in this because he made this statement at one point. He said, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and then only 5 minutes finding the solution. Why did he say that? Because if he spent 55 minutes defining the problem, the solutions start presenting themselves to you. Like he starts figuring out what they are quickly once you have a good mastery of the problem. What he's talking about here is that early design research, that first step that your customers supposedly have gone through to have knowledge about what needs to be made, what the product needs to be, what it needs to do, how it needs to function, how it needs to solve users' needs. So the idea is that this knowledge for this research is power to your customer's development team. And so when they go through this design research, this is what they're shooting for here. I listed some bullet points, but they want to discover any unmet user needs that they haven't already seen. They want to understand what the ergonomics are around how their user is going to use this product. They really want to understand the usability risk. What could go wrong if my user somehow fumbled, didn't use it correctly? They got to know what that risk level is. They want to improve their learning about it. It's like, we want to see what these users are going through. So us as a development group and a design team, we can understand what's really going on here. They want to discover the ability to patent things, of course. HE75 is a human factors guideline. They want to understand all the things they're supposed to do to understand human factors and usability. And in the end, they want to have these things called design inputs, which really, in this case, when your design-focused customers are doing this kind of research, the two types of design inputs they're really getting at, they want to discover user interface requirements. And user interface isn't just display screens. It's anything that the user is going to touch or see or hear on the product. They want to understand those requirements, and they want to understand the product requirements. That's what they're driving at in that first phase of the process that they're going through. And because it's, like I said, knowledge is power. And so I threw a little quiz in here for you guys to demonstrate this. And when I do this in person, it's easy to do this quiz because I have people raise their hand. This is going to be much harder because we have a smaller group because we're not in person. And I think the way we raise our hand in a group like this is there's a hand raising function, isn't there, Brenda, down there, where you can click a button. It's like raise your hand if you have a
Yeah,
question.
I think it's the reactions. And then you click on
Reaction.
raise hand, yeah.
Yeah. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask some questions. This is a little quiz. And I'm going to ask you to hit one of those reactions. And then Steve, I can't see it. So if you can count the reactions for me, that would be great. So let's give this a try. Take just a couple of seconds. Pop quiz. All I do is I just ask you this question. What do the words in this random list have in common? And I give you 20 seconds. So you got 20 seconds to look at this list. And just kind of ask yourself, what do these have in common? What do these words have in common? Now, sometimes people start shouting this out, but that's not going to happen here. So I just want you to look at that. So, okay, that's 20 seconds. So I'm going to take that list away. All right, now, if you think, so I'm not going to ask anybody, nobody has to say anything, you're not going to get tested. But I'm just going to ask if you think you might know what those words have in common, hit a reaction, and then Steve, count how many people reacted. All you have to do is you think you might know, and we're not going to ask you for an explanation.
All right. Anyone think they know? Hit that reaction. Looks like we got one. Anyone else? I know I'm not raising my hand.
Okay. So we got what, one out of how many people do we have on?
About 15 or so.
15. So one, if we had one, maybe 1.5, 2, we'd be hovering around 10%, right? Okay. If we had 1.5. All right. Now I'm going to ask you guys another question. Yeah. So take those reactions away if you can. Okay. Now I'm just going to read you that same list, the same words. Just going to read it to you. So just listen. Those words, if I remember correctly, they were Neil, Pierce, Hugh, Russell, Doug, Phil, Pete, Cy, Ben, and Jim. Okay. So I just read you those same words. So now let's do another quick survey. Now, if you think you might know what those random words have in common, do another little reaction. Let's count again. And you can, if you're the person that did it before, you can do it again. Okay, so put them up. What do we got so far?
1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sure some people are finding the reaction, but
okay. So we might have had roughly 4 to 6 or so. I see they're gone now, but roughly.
yeah, they disappeared quickly, so it might have been
Okay.
close to half.
Yeah, so close to half. So close to 50%. First one was 10%. This one was 50%. Okay, now last thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna show you that list again. Here's that list. Same exact words. Neil, Pierce, Hugh, Russell, Doug, Phil, Pete, Cy, Ben, and Jim. Now, if I asked, and I'm not going to, but now if I asked, I'm assuming we would get 100%. Everybody sees that these are men's names. Okay. So what did we learn there? Why did we do that? And what did we learn? Well, I was asking you to share your knowledge of a problem. Plain and simple. What was your knowledge of a problem? I gave you a problem and want to know your knowledge. When you were using one of your 5 senses, vision, I showed you the list. Collectively as a group, we had 10% knowledge of that problem. As soon as we went to a second of your 2 senses, as soon as we added hearing, so 2 senses, vision and hearing, we immediately leaped from 10% collective knowledge of the problem to 50% collective knowledge of the problem, just by employing a second sense. That's what that first research phase of that development process that designers are going through, that's what that first research phase does for you. It's like using a second sense. You go out and you watch and you see what users need, what they feel, what they're doing when they're using it, and you get all of this stuff that you see and hear and feel. You get that inside of you, then you take that back into your problem solving, and you have a higher level of knowledge of what the problem is. And like Einstein said, if you can understand what the problem is better, he can solve it better. So that research phase, some people think, oh, it's a waste of time to go, users, whatever. It's not. It's like that secret weapon. So what does this mean for you guys? Well, it means that these people who are developing, these designers who are developing this, they need your advice early in that research phase to avoid costly mistakes, because they're learning what users need. And before they go off on a tangent about how they're going to develop a product that does that, they need to hear what you as a manufacturer have to say about how that can be done so they can do that. So this is one of the hardest things that you could ever do, is try to interject yourself into a development process that early. It's not easy to do, but it's very helpful for your users. And why? Because they're thinking about a lot of stuff. All of this stuff is going through their mind, and voice of customer is one of the biggest ones. That's what they're doing in that research, is they're understanding what do their customers say, what do their customers feel, and they're focusing a lot on that, and they're not so focusing so much on this one down here, even though they're supposed to be, and they should be. Their left brain isn't just being utilized as much as it should be, thinking about production methodologies and manufacturing methodologies down at the bottom. So they need your help to keep that top of mind, not to shoot down their ideas. They need your help to understand how to join that left side and that right side together when they need to. That's what they need you for. They don't want to fall into this trap. What Henry Ford said, if I had just done what my customers would have asked for, I would have just made a faster horse. So they're not out there just doing what their customers ask for. Oh, we need a product that has a big handle on the top. Okay, let's make it. That's not what they're doing. They're doing all of this other stuff, doing this creative divergent thinking, trying to meet their users' deep, deep needs and fulfill that potential that we talked about in the beginning for their device to fill their users' deep needs. That's what they're thinking about. So lastly, what does this mean for you? What can you do as you start to begin to try to onboard a customer into your manufacturing world? And I think there's some, knowing how your customers think and what their needs are, I think there's some really creative efficiencies that you can do to really help this process of onboarding customers into your manufacturing world. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to share 7 winning strategies that you can use to land business with a design-focused customer. This will get these types of customers into your plate and off of someone else's plate if you can employ these 7 strategies. And then we'll be done after this, so we don't have a lot left. So first one is show that you understand their needs, okay? And there's ways that you can show that you understand their needs. We just talked about what their needs are and how they're thinking. So I threw a few bullets out here that I think are great ways that you could actually do this and show this to them, and they would be super impressed with your abilities. So ask for their list of user needs. I spent a lot of time talking about they're trying to have their product meet the potential of meeting all of their clients' needs. Ask them for that list of what their user needs are. That'll really impress them, and it'll let you know what they're thinking. You'll know that they're constantly trying to meet their users' needs. When they, if it's a medical device, when they submit to the FDA for approval, they have to show that they've validated their device against this list of user needs right here. So if it's a medical device, they have that list. I mean, you're not asking for something they don't have. If it's not a medical device, they might not, but then you can ask them questions about user needs. I would highly, number 2, I'd highly suggest setting up a meeting where your customers, designers can be in the room, and you just open-endedly ask them, describe the vision for this product in terms, and use the terms usability and functionality. Say, I want to hear about what your vision is for the usability of this product, and I want to hear what your vision is for the functionality. You're going to learn a ton of things that you would have missed, and you might have been making suggestions or manufacturing decisions that might violate some of their needs had you not done this. And they'll be very impressed that you asked for this. It shows that you care and that you understand. And the last one, I would suggest making a little worksheet for them. If you can't, meet with them or whatever, make a little worksheet and ask them to fill it out and say, give me these 2 things. Tell me what the device's user interface requirements are, and tell me what the device's functionality requirements are. Now, sometimes really good customers have these already. They've got a deep, deep, huge list of requirements. But if they don't, or if you've looked at their requirements and all of their requirements are technical requirements, and believe me, I've seen this as more of the norm, not the exception. The customer comes in and they seem like a great customer. They've got a huge list of requirements, and they're all technical requirements. There's nothing in there for user interface requirements or what I call product requirements. I've said device functionality here, but really product requirements. So maybe make a little worksheet, ask them for these things, fill it out. Again, I think that'll really impress them. A second thing you can do is show that you can help them meet those needs. So then you can, once you've done that, and I wouldn't do this until you've done the first one, shows you care and you're listening. Then this one starts to show, okay, I can help you meet those needs. So you can start offering some early design for manufacturing advice. That's great, any way, shape, or form. For sure, make early suggestions related to materials, methods, and assembly, but only ones that support those requirements that you already asked for. If you start doing this before asking for the requirements, they might start seeing you as a threat to their product integrity instead of this helpful partner. And that's what you want to be, is this helpful partner. And then the last thing, do some value engineering, review their bill of materials early on, suggest components and parts that might reduce, the manufacturing and the assembly complexities. But again, don't do this until you've done the first one. They go hand in hand.
Tom, I was going to ask you about, you kind of talked about it a little bit in the second bullet there, and I really like the fact that you use the word threat, because that kind of answered my question a little bit, in that, oftentimes customers that have these grandiose ideas, or, they're really creative, or it's about the user interface, but yet then we say, well, yeah, but you can't do that because that can't possibly be manufactured that way. And I like the fact that you use the word threat, because oftentimes we always think, well, they just don't know what they're doing. We're fixing that. Well, in reality, we're threatening their excitement or their whatever, and we're kind of taken away. So how do you often deal with that when you've got something that's concrete? And I know we always want to think outside the box and say, okay, well, stop thinking that we can't do it. Maybe there is some new innovative way to do it, but sometimes it does go beyond the boundaries of physics, or, so how do you deal with that when you're threatening their excitement with your reality?
Yeah, they might see it as you're threatening their potential to fulfill their users' needs by having the device made this way. And you don't want it to seem like that at all. So the way to succeed is to flip it and become their designer friend, and focus on your design abilities and say, hey, we see that there could be some difficulties down the road trying to manufacture this the way you have. But what we would love to do is help you figure out ways to change the design and redesign it so it can fulfill those user needs. It can function the way you want, but it'll be manufactured either more efficiently and less expensive, or it'll actually be manufactured where it can't be manufactured at all the way that you're doing it. So you come along with the solution. I tell my team here this all the time. I don't want to hear problems. I want to hear solutions. Don't come to me with a problem. Come to me with a solution. Think of it that way. Don't go to them with a problem and saying you can't make this. Go to them with the solution and say, in order for this to be made, it has to be done this way, and we've solved it for you. This is how it would have to be redesigned. Would you like to hire us to do it? Or do it, or do it as a value add. So, and that goes into the next one right here. That segues right into this. Show them your design capabilities. So you've identified some things. Now show them you can solve the problem. They're likely to be impressed. And if you can offer, I put in green there, if you can offer creative and innovative design solutions, they're going to be impressed by that. So you highlight your expertise, you show other examples, you say, we've had customers with products like this before. They had to make it this way because this way isn't manufacturable. And look what we did on this one. And we can do that for you too if we just change this, and this. And we'll preserve your functionality, because in steps 1 and 2, we already learned about what your device needs to do, and we're not going to threaten that. We're going to enhance that. So that's really the way to do it, is have some design expertise on your staff. The fourth one is then emphasize your manufacturing capabilities. So I wouldn't do this until you've done the first 3, because then they're going to say, yeah, everybody tells me this. But if you've done the first 3, you've already positioned yourself to become a partner with them and a helper, and not somebody who opposes them or is a threat. Now you can start talking about how you can solve those issues, your experience, but mostly that last thing, you understand their design requirements and you're going to help them meet those design requirements. That's where their potential lies. Their potential to solve their users' needs lies in those design requirements. So if you can suggest design changes that will support those, you will win with them every time. That's what they're looking for. That's just going to make them feel like heroes. It's going to make you look like a hero, then they're going to take all the credit and they're going to be the hero that makes this thing work. But you're the hero behind the hero. The last couple of things I would say, be flexible. These kinds of customers, you might have to customize your manufacturing process a little bit. They're going to come to you with unique things, weird needs, unique requirements, weird ways they want you to do stuff. And I would say have an open mind first to maybe customizing to make it fit. before you steer them in a different direction. It might cost more, and you can say, yeah, we can do that, but that's going to be a much more highly automated robotic setup than we anticipated, and it can be done, but are you willing to pay for that? And you can start bringing some of that to it. So show them your flexibility so they see that. So you're not that rigid opposition. You're willing to flex and work with them. And then lastly, offer some value-added services. And we already talked about DFM advice. That's great. But what about some other forms of analysis? What if you can run your Ansys or your Cosmos software and figure some things out for them that they wouldn't have thought about? Find some areas that might be stressed or strained that they weren't aware of. What about, supply chain? Can you help them with understanding that? And then you start talking about alternatives that would improve their supply chain. These things are things that you're familiar with that they might not be so familiar with, and you can offer them fairly easily because these are arrows in your quiver, and it might cost you something, but it wouldn't cost you a ton. But you come across looking like heroes to them if you do this. So I would suggest, especially for these design-oriented customers, you bring some reality in these areas to them. And then lastly, and this is more of a broad thing, but I think this is important to build this relationship. If you're doing all these first 6 things, I think you will have been building this relationship with them. And that's so important because when you get a relationship with your customers, and you've shown you understand their needs. So that's a big part of what I've been talking about, is you demonstrate that you understand their needs and you've done things to show that. And then you're giving them these ideas that aren't ideas that wreck their potential. They're ideas that enhance their ability to succeed with their potential. And you're responsive. Wow, then you've developed this relationship. And I put in green there 2 important things. I said, this can help establish trust and build an emotional connection. The reason I highlighted those 2 things is because experts tell us that there's 2 things that move money in a sales situation. If you want to make a sale and you are going to have somebody move their money from them to you and make a sale, there's only 2 things you have to achieve: trust and emotion. Those 2 things move money. And that's what you need to do. So doing all of these things is going to get them to trust you. And then you're going to have built this emotional connection. I talked about that hero feeling where you made them look like a hero. You came through and looked like a hero. You helped them achieve their goal. That was a good emotional feeling because they're going to reach the potential for their device, is going to reach the potential to meet their users' needs. All this emotion has been going on, and you will secure that account if you've built that trust and made that emotional connection. And I think by doing those 6 things, I think you can do that and build that. So really, in summary, the 3 things: understand how your customer thinks and be empathetic to how they think. Empathetic means you go through it yourself, so you feel what they feel. Different than sympathetic, just means you feel sorry for them. And that's big, that's big. It goes to the point where you think, oh, these people are idiots, they don't know what they're doing. That's sympathy. Empathy is, I see what they're going through. I understand the process. I'm thinking through it myself. I see how they got to where they are, and I want to help them. That's empathy. Understand how your customer thinks with empathy. 2, understand their needs and what they need from you. And then 3, use those strategies to onboard them. I think that would go a long way into changing what could be a difficult problem customer into a long-term customer that relies on you, into the future. There you go. It's 12:58. We got 2 minutes. How's that for timing?
Perfect. Nice job, Tom. Yeah, if anyone has any further questions, feel free to put them in the chat log here, and we'll wrap up in just a minute. But one question here, Tom, is so you talked about kind of the way designers think versus the way the engineers think, and then of course we got the way machinists or tool makers or whatever else think, maybe closer to engineers. But do you find that you have to? I mean, you guys are a specific firm that is isolated from the rest, right? I shouldn't say isolated, but you've got a team of people that are all working on innovation and designs and ideas, and many of our businesses are primarily on the manufacturing side, producing things. Do you find that you kind of need to separate the two? I mean, how do you, I thought about that years past. It's like, well, do we want to develop our own true design team at our manufacturing company? It's like we're honest with ourselves and saying we don't even know how we manage those people because we think so differently. How do we even put them into the employee mold of the rest of our company? I mean, do you think they need to be separate?
I wouldn't personally, I wouldn't, if I owned a manufacturing company, I wouldn't try to have a design team in my manufacturing company. What I would try to do is I would try to make key members of the team. I would try to give them sort of design skills, a little design background. Maybe you send them to a few seminars. Maybe they do a little online training. There's these there's online design thinking classes. I would say take some of your key members, expose them to design thinking courses, and so they can be empathetic to your design-oriented customers' needs, and that's all you need. If you started to try to develop a real design team, I think your design-oriented customers, they might not react to that as well because they think that's their job. What they want is assistance from you. They don't necessarily want you doing their job. They just want you to help them succeed. So I think that empathy, understanding how they work is the way to do that. So small amount of training, exposure to the design world, and then just keep that on your staff. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Especially in this early stuff, because everything I'm talking about is early. I mean, some of it's pre quoting activity.
Absolutely. Well, a few of the key things that I wrote down too is just that making a list of their user needs and actually asking, we always talk about what they want, but what does their actual user want, and asking for that actual list. I wouldn't have thought asking for the physical list. And then obviously, bringing the solution rather than the problem. Like we all kind of know that, but yet then that idea of not being the threat to their process or their solution, and us being a part of, like you said, enhancing it. And then the sale idea too, on trust and emotion. Those are key factors, and understanding that, if we're working with a customer, I mean, how do you make them a success so that they want to give you money because you're going to help them be a success. So
exactly. If they walk in your door and every time they do, they have this feeling, this emotional feeling inside that whatever they do with you, it's going to be a success. It's on the path to success. It always turns out positive. It always turns out good. Even if it's a difficulty, you always figure out how to make it something positive. That feeling is going to be the emotion inside them that, joined with the trust, is going to make that buying decision. So yeah, and understanding those needs early is the big thing, because then all of your advice is always supporting those needs. It's never inadvertently misaligned advice that opposes those needs, because you're aware of what they are at the get-go.
Yeah. Well, with that, I want to thank you, Tom, for the great presentation, great insights, and as always, I love listening to you talk, and makes me want to think a little differently.